The ego's reality. Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus the Christ. The beliefs that make up both the personal and collective illusory reality are largely beliefs that the ego holds about reality. The ego's beliefs are easy enough to discover because they appear as thoughts that run through your mind. Your thoughts are primarily your ego's thoughts, along with some conditioning. Not really your thoughts, not the real you anyway. This simple fact that the voice in your head is primarily the ego's voice explains why most people are the way they are and why the world is the way it is. People think they're what their ego says they are, and people behave the way the ego suggests they behave, at least much of the time. Fortunately, many also respond to the deeper cues that come from their true self. Interestingly, many of the ego's beliefs about reality are quite different from the truth. The picture the ego paints of reality is not accurate and consequently leads to unfortunate results and unnecessary suffering. That suffering eventually wakes people up to reality. So there is method in this seeming madness. Because the beliefs held by the ego are for the most part contrary to the truth about reality, the egoic state of consciousness, which is the state of consciousness of most of humanity most of the time, could be called insane. To believe and act as if something is true when it's not could be a definition of insanity. It could certainly be called delusional. However, because most people believe the misperceptions of the ego, these perceptions are not generally questioned, and not without a cost to those who do question them. As in the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Emperor's New Clothes, no one dares to tell the truth to the king for fear of being thought to be stupid. The situation humanity finds itself in is even worse than that. Very few even know the truth about reality, because most don't think to inquire into the mystery that is life, the mystery at everyone's core. Fortunately, there have always been those who inquired and who realized the truth and were willing to tell it. And fortunately, times have changed. Questioning is rampant. The insanity of the stream of thoughts that goes through people's minds is exposed, and people are becoming free from the programming that kept them in a state of unquestioning suffering. What is the egoic state of consciousness, and what beliefs does it rest on? Everyone knows the egoic state of consciousness well, but it may not be thought of as a state of consciousness if you don't realize that another state is possible. For most people, the egoic state of consciousness seems to be just the way things are, the way life is. For most, the illusory reality created by their thoughts is the only reality, and that reality is scary, untrustworthy, cruel, harsh, and unfair. This is the ego's view of reality, and a case can be made for this. However, the ego is ignoring how abundant and supportive reality, life, is. Why human beings are given an ego that has such perceptions is a subject for another time. Suffice it to say that the programming that is the ego is not a mistake, but part of the divine design. The ego not only shapes the sense of individuality, it is also behind the drama in life by creating the inner and outer conflict that drives life forward and provides innumerable lessons which would not occur without this programming. Reality only seems scary, untrustworthy, cruel, harsh, and unfair because believing that life is scary, untrustworthy, cruel, harsh, and unfair keeps people from experiencing reality as supportive and trustworthy, although reality is admittedly unpredictable and difficult at times. The belief that reality is scary, untrustworthy, cruel, harsh, and unfair becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those beliefs become the lens through which people see reality. This lens is the egoic state of consciousness, the illusory reality created by the ego. The feelings created by these beliefs, particularly fear and anger, make the ego's perception seem true, and then actions or no actions are taken in keeping with these perceptions. These actions evoke responses from people and life in general that reflect back and reinforce the internal state of fear, anger, and distrust. For example, if you believe that life is scary, untrustworthy, cruel, harsh, and unfair, then you may also conclude that your attitude must be eat or be eaten, attack or be attacked, look out for number one. If this is what you believe, then the aggressive internal climate created by those beliefs will cause you to behave accordingly. And if that is how you behave, then that's how other people are likely to behave toward you. Then that will become your experience and the experience of anyone else who takes on those same beliefs, which they will if they encounter enough people like you. This is how a particular state of consciousness can come to pervade a world. One state of consciousness is contagious. Others start to behave toward you as you behave. If enough people are behaving similarly, the beliefs underlying that state of consciousness are reinforced and become believable, and the illusory reality created by those beliefs appears true and real. Egoic beliefs and behavior create a world where people behave egoically. Beliefs manifest as reality. This is why nothing short of a change in consciousness will change your world fundamentally. This change of consciousness is imperative now. That consciousness is contagious is also good news. Changing the consciousness of a relatively few number of people can cause a snowballing effect, because the truth has an advantage over the ego's lies, since the ego's lies lead only to suffering, and the truth to the opposite. Once enough people see the falseness of their thoughts and realize that their thoughts are the cause of their suffering, and once people realize the possibility of a better reality, consciousness can change quite rapidly. Much of what keeps the ego's lies in place now is the fear of being different from the crowd, of stepping beyond convention and going against how most people think. Once there's less of a stigma around questioning your programming, because more people are not drinking the ego's Kool-Aid, people will awaken to the truth, to reality, much more easily. You are in the midst of and a witness to a revolution of consciousness right now, in your time. Here's another example of how the egoic state of consciousness can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe that life is scary, untrustworthy, cruel, harsh, and unfair, instead of feeling angry and aggressive, you may feel defeated, powerless, and afraid to face life. Many who find themselves in the grip of addictions feel just this way. Such an emotional climate makes it difficult to summon the confidence, optimism, courage, fortitude, insight, and perseverance necessary to achieve a happy, fulfilling life. Without the necessary internal emotional climate, you are not as likely to go after what will help you to be happy, grow, have healthy relationships, develop your talents, or do what makes your heart sing. You will probably settle for a life of getting by, one that seems safe but is unfulfilling and joyless, thereby reinforcing the perception that life is unfair and harsh, and happiness is out of reach. The life that your ego would have you create, as reflected in the thoughts that go through your mind, and the life that your heart or soul would have you create, are very different lives. Most people follow their heart at least some of the time if they're at all happy, but many do not, and a life of doing only what your thoughts tell you to do is hardly worth living. You are here for a reason, and that reason is discovered by following your heart, by following your intuition and your joy, not by following the voice in your head. Isn't it amazing that this is not taught to children at an early age and taught in schools? Instead, institutions teach the opposite. Your mind has all the answers. The stream of thoughts in your mind is not the same thing as your intellect. Unlike the voice in your head, your intellect does not speak to you mentally, but is a tool for performing the mental tasks necessary for surviving, creating, and flourishing. The voice in your head does not have the answers for how to live your life, although it pretends to. For guidance about how to live your life, you need contact with your true nature, your heart, and attunement to your intuition and other subtle means the soul uses to guide each person. Your mind is not who you are. You are a spiritual being. Your mind, including your intellect, was never meant to be the master, but the servant of who you really are. There is so much about reality that the ego does not include in its perceptions and does not understand, making the ego a particularly poor guide to life. The ego's view of reality filters out the spiritual side of life, because the ego does not and will never understand the great mystery that is life. When something leaves so much of the truth out, it's difficult to call it anything but a lie. Partial truths just are not true, although something that is partly true may seem true, which is why the ego's perspective on reality does seem credible. The ego's limited view of reality also seems true because human beings are programmed to believe their thoughts. You naturally believe what you think. You naturally identify the thoughts that run through your mind as your thoughts. And being egocentric, as the ego is, you naturally assume that your thoughts are the correct ones, not just for you, but for others as well. This egocentricity and undying trust in the voice in your head makes you feel like you know more than you actually know. The basic stance of the ego and of the mind is, I know this because I think this. This self-certainty keeps people from looking more objectively at their thoughts and questioning them. If they did, the illusory reality spun by the mind would fall apart. And so it does, once you start taking a good look at the stream of thoughts that seems to be yours. The ego's illusory reality is one in which the ego believes it knows, while reality is the experience of mostly not knowing, until you do actually know something. What a difference this is! The ego pretends to know things it doesn't actually know just to feel safe, secure, and right. But how safe and secure does it make you to believe that you know something when you don't? The only security that pretending to know brings is a false sense of security. The ego, as reflected in the stream of thoughts that seems to be yours, pretends to know what is going to happen, pretends to know why things happened, pretends to know what others are thinking and feeling, pretends to know what others are like, pretends to know what's right for others and for itself, and pretends to have answers and knowledge it doesn't have. That's a lot of pretending, all to avoid the painful, for the ego, truth that the me doesn't actually know very much. The truth about your moment-to-moment reality is that you don't know very much, not nearly as much as you'd like to know. Does that make life scary, untrustworthy, cruel, harsh, and unfair? Only to the ego, only if you believe it does. Not knowing is just what it's like to live in reality instead of in one's illusory reality. Not knowing something doesn't feel dangerous or scary once you realize that life operates on a need-to-know basis. You don't need to know until you do, and then you do. It's mostly because the ego doesn't trust life that the ego feels it needs to know. When you trust life, you discover that you don't need to know the things the ego wanted to know. All of that knowing and pretending to know only gets in the way of purely experiencing the here and now. Because if you think you know something about what you're experiencing, you'll be mentally comparing your ideas with what you're experiencing, rather than experiencing whatever you're experiencing. For instance, if you think you know someone, then your image of that person will interfere with experiencing that person freshly and clearly, as he or she actually is in that moment. This bringing of the past and other ideas about someone into your current interactions is the cause of most relationship difficulties. Or if you think you know a flower because you know its name or something about it, you'll be busy with your thoughts about the flower rather than experiencing the flower. Thinking and experiencing are two very different experiences, different states of consciousness, really. One is a mental experience, and one is an actual experience of reality. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being open to this message. I am with you always.